Let's see. There are many other parallels between Fethullah Gulen's understanding of Sufism and the Christian spiritual path of St. Francis of Assisi. Parallels that include fluctuations of joy and sorrow, parallels in practices such as zikr and singing the divine praises, parallels for times of prayer, fasting, and pilgrimage. All of this would be fodder for further study. It's my hope that this short paper has begun to scratch the surface of what can be a fruitful dialogue between two very great mystical traditions. I will end by citing the famous prayer of St. Francis, which is not written by Francis at all, but kind of summarizes his spirituality. And I believe that Fethullah Gulen would appreciate these words. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for keeping the time limit. I now want to introduce Professor Crystal McCormick from the Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Austin, Texas, and she will speak to us on Western feminism, friends or foes.
Good morning. One thing I want to say before I begin this paper is that it is largely a comparative approach of the experience of women in Islam and Christianity, but that is not intended to be exclusive of the experience of women within other religious traditions. But for our time here and for our purposes here, I'm focusing on these two traditions. And the other thing is I'm going to try and stay on time, but I thought I had 20 minutes. So, oh, okay. Oh, now I feel bad then, so I'm going to still try, okay? Okay. Fethullah Gulen and Western feminism, friends or foes? Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. The beautiful Arabic words of the Muslim call to prayer ring out across the globe as Muslim adherents heed the call and commit to their ritual of daily prayer. The words of the azan, like any other recitation, are stirring and moving. Yet one cannot help but notice that they are, with few exceptions, coming from the lips of a man. And just as if one is to walk into a mosque, with few exceptions, they will find an imam that is male, and with few exceptions, one will find that the voices of the Islamic tradition have been overwhelmingly male. Similarly, when one enters the door to any of the various Christian churches, they too, with some exceptions, will find themselves met by a male pastor, and he will stand behind the pulpit of the church and proclaim words that carry the power to shape theology and formulate ideas. He will stand behind the communion table as a symbol of authority and wisdom for his tradition. And lest we forget that if one is to search the Christian tradition for its pivotal and formative voices, there too one will be met with an overwhelming amount of male voices. And so it is clear that on many fronts, the women of these two traditions are noticeably absent, hidden perhaps behind the patriarchal structures that have shaped and become embedded in these two traditions. The women have often appeared like the passive, silent actors in a play whose role is limited to moving about in the background in silence and passivity. The strong presence of males and noticeable absence of females in the forefront of these traditions has been a great source of pain for many women. In fact, it was Jewish feminist theologian Judith Plaskow who gave voice to these feelings and anguish felt by many women of the various traditions. She asked, what from our traditions are ours? What can we claim that has not wounded us? It is only when we look closely at the painful experience of women such as these that we begin to understand what has given birth to the many voices that have shaped the feminist movement. It is only then that we begin to imagine what it is like for us as women to imagine that God has ordained only males as those who are to teach and to have authority, to lead and to sing the beautiful words of the Azan. It's only then that we begin to understand that there are feelings of hurt and pain because the silence of the women in these traditions has been declared as faithful, and their wise protest has been discarded, overlooked, or maybe misunderstood. And so this brings us to the issue at hand, Western feminism and Fethullah Gulen. Fethullah Gulen has said that the feminist movement has frequently deviated from protecting the rights of women to the excess of trying to establish their dominance. Gulen has also referred to feminism as a reactionary movement that has ended up in extremism. The question that arises then is whether Fethullah Gulen is one who has discarded, overlooked, or simply misunderstood Western feminism. But before we address this question, let us consider whether or not Gulen's criticisms of this movement are merited. Some might have the inclination to quickly respond with the affirmative, yes, feminism is about dominance. Others might have the inclination to be insulted by such criticisms and to conclude that they are nothing more than patriarchy at its best. The fact is that Fethullah Gulen's criticisms of this movement are merited, to the extent that some streams of Western feminism have found themselves in a position where they have become guilty of that which they speak against, hierarchy and dominance. These feminist movements, in an attempt to accuse and name an oppressor, have themselves taken on the character of the oppressor. At various points in its history, various streams within the Western feminist movement have used strong rhetoric that has been imbued with sentiments of anger and resentment towards men. And those who study Western feminism are surely all too familiar with the work of Mary Daly, who, along with others that have followed in her footsteps, determined that religious traditions like Christianity are just simply irredeemably patriarchal. Their language has often communicated an animosity towards men that is very palpable. And so one can affirm Gulen's criticisms of the Western feminist movement and determine that Gulen has not discarded or overlooked Western feminism, but we will see that he has not fully understood the depth of the movement. A common misunderstanding for many people with feminism is to understand it solely by the caricatures which we have described here. Another common misunderstanding is to think of Western feminist movement as a uniform movement, associating the ideological perspective of certain feminists with the movement as a whole.